Brock Halverson grabbed the worn canvas tote by its strap and swung it through the air like it was nothing, like it was garbage somebody forgot to throw out. And when it hit the marble floor of the perfume counter, the sound cracked through the entire first floor of Marlowe and Finch. A reading glasses case skidded under a display table. A small tin of butterscotch candies rolled and rolled until it stopped against a stranger's shoe, and a photograph, a small, curling photograph in a cracked plastic sleeve, landed face up on the cold stone floor for everyone to see. "I told you to leave," Brock said, loud enough that 3 customers near the escalators turned around. "We don't need your kind making a scene in my store." The woman he was speaking to didn't move for a long moment. She just looked down at the photograph on the floor. A young man in a graduation gown, squinting into the sun, his arm around a woman who looked exactly like her, 30 years younger. Then a young associate came jogging across the floor, his name tag catching the light, his face draining of color before he even reached the counter. He leaned in close to Brock and said 4 words. Brock Halverson's hand, the one still raised from throwing the bag, went limp at his side. "Let me take you back. 3 hours earlier, none of this had happened yet. None of it." Adelaide Winslow Carrigan was standing in her kitchen in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood outside Cincinnati, pouring coffee into the same chipped blue mug she'd been using for 11 years, ever since her husband Walter passed and she'd stopped caring about matching sets. The radio was on low, some morning talk show she wasn't really listening to. Outside the window, the maple tree was just starting to turn, the first hints of orange creeping in at the edges of the leaves. She was 67 years old. Her hands had started to ache in the mornings the way they did now, a low throb in the knuckles that no amount of stretching fully chased away. Her hair, which she'd worn long and dark her whole adult life, was now silver and cropped short, practical the way she liked it. She had buried a husband and a sister in the last 6 years, and she had learned, the way people learn when grief becomes a regular visitor, how to keep moving anyway. Her daughter, Camille, called while she was finishing her coffee. "Mom, are you doing the thing again today?" "I'm doing the thing again today." "You know you don't have to keep doing this yourself. You could send someone. You're 67, not 27. Adelaide smiled into the phone. "I built that company from a single shoe counter in 1987, Camille. I'm not going to stop walking through my own stores because my knees complain a little." "At least tell me which one this time." "The Riverside Plaza location. The new flagship." There was a pause on the other end. "That's the one with the new district manager everyone's been raving about. Brock somebody." "Halverson," Adelaide said. "Yes, I've heard good things too. Numbers are up 40% since he took over. I'd like to see how he runs a floor. Just be careful." "I'm always careful." What Adelaide didn't say, what she never said, not even to Camille, not really, was why she still did this herself, 4 or 5 times a year, dressed in plain slacks and a cardigan, instead of the tailored suits she wore to board meetings. Carrying nothing but an old canvas tote bag that had belonged to her late sister. She called it walking the floor. The executive team called it, a little uneasily, the chairwoman's surprise visits. What it actually was, underneath all the polite language, was the only way Adelaide had ever found to learn the truth about her own company. Numbers on a spreadsheet could be managed. Customer satisfaction surveys could be massaged. But nobody fakes how they treat a stranger they think doesn't matter. Adelaide Winslow Carrigan was the founder and chairwoman emerita of Marlowe and Finch, a chain of 41 department stores across 11 states, built from nothing over 36 years into one of the most respected retail names in the Midwest. She had stepped back from day-to-day operations 8 years ago after Walter's first heart attack, handing the CEO title to a man she trusted. But she had never, not once, stopped walking the floor. She drove herself to the Riverside Plaza location that afternoon in her 10-year-old sedan, parked in the regular customer lot instead of the executive spaces around back, and walked in through the main entrance, carrying her sister's old tote bag over one shoulder. The store was beautiful. She'd seen the renderings, approved the budget, but seeing it finished took her breath a little. Soaring ceilings, warm lighting, a grand staircase curling up through the center of the atrium, like something out of a European hotel. She felt a flicker of real pride. She wandered the main floor slowly, the way an ordinary customer would, pausing at the handbag displays, running her fingers along a silk scarf, watching how the staff moved. A young associate near the jewelry counter helped an elderly man find a watch battery with real patience, crouching down to his eye level, speaking slowly and kindly. Adelaide made a small mental note. That was good. That was exactly what she'd hoped to see. Then she heard him before she saw him. A voice, sharp and carrying, cutting across the perfume counter where a tall man in an immaculate charcoal suit was speaking to a sales associate. His tie was knotted too tight, his cufflinks catching the light every time he gestured, which was often. "This is unacceptable," he was saying, "absolutely unacceptable. I don't care what corporate says about customer experience metrics. If the registers are down for even 30 seconds during peak hours, that's lost revenue, and lost revenue is a reflection on you." The associate, a young man whose name tag read Meissen, nodded quickly. "I'm sorry, sir. The system's already back up. It was just, I don't want excuses. I want results." The man turned sharply, and his eyes landed on Adelaide, who had paused near the counter to look at a display of crystal perfume bottles. He looked at her the way a person looks at a smudge on a window, a brief, dismissive registering, and then he looked away, already moving on. That was Brock Halverson. Adelaide recognized him from his employee photo in the executive briefing packet, though in person he carried himself even taller than she'd expected, his presence filling whatever space he stood in. 44 years old. Hired 18 months ago from a competing chain, brought in specifically to turn around underperforming locations. The numbers under his leadership were, by every metric the board cared about, extraordinary. Adelaide opened her notebook, a small leather one she always carried in the side pocket of the tote, and wrote one word, Halverson. She continued through the store. Most of what she saw was good, even impressive. The shoe department was organized beautifully. A young woman in housewares spent 10 unhurried minutes helping a flustered young mother decide between 2 sets of dishware, never once rushing her. Adelaide felt something warm settle in her chest. This was why she still did this. Not to catch people failing, but to find the ones doing it right, so she could make sure they were seen. Then she made her way toward the customer service desk near the front entrance, intending to ask about the return policy on a coat she was considering, the way any ordinary shopper might. That's when Brock Halverson stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am." His voice had changed completely from the one he'd used moments ago in the perfume aisle. It had gone flat, suspicious, edged with something Adelaide recognized instantly, something she had felt directed at her exactly once before in her life, a very long time ago, in a department store not so different from this one, when she was a 19-year-old girl working her first retail job, and a manager had accused her of stealing a scarf she had, in fact purchased 20 minutes earlier with her own paycheck. "Yes?" Adelaide said. "I've been watching you for the last 10 minutes. Brock's eyes moved over her, taking in the cardigan, the worn tote bag, the comfortable walking shoes. "You've handled merchandise at 4 different counters, and you haven't made a single purchase. I'm browsing. With respect, ma'am. That's what a lot of people say." He glanced toward the security camera mounted near the ceiling, then back at her. "I'd like to see what's in your bag." A young woman pushing a stroller nearby slowed her steps. An older couple browsing scarves nearby went quiet, both pretending to study a display rack while clearly listening. "I'm not required to show you the contents of my bag," Adelaide said calmly. "I haven't done anything. That's exactly what someone who has done something says." Brock's jaw tightened. "I run a clean store. I don't have time for this. You can show me what's in the bag, or I can call my loss prevention officer, and we can do this the hard way." Adelaide felt the heat rise behind her eyes. Not tears, not yet. Something older and steadier, a familiar cold weight settling into her stomach. She thought of the scarf 30 years ago, the manager's hand closing around her wrist, hard enough to bruise. She thought of how long it had taken her to walk into a department store again without her pulse climbing. She set her bag down on the counter, slowly, and opened it herself. Inside, a paperback novel with a cracked spine, a pair of reading glasses in a worn case, a small tin of butterscotch candies, her wallet, a pen, the leather notebook, and, tucked into the inside pocket, the photograph of her son Theo at his graduation, the one she carried everywhere because Walter had taken it 3 months before his first heart attack, and it was the last photo of the two of them together, as a family before everything started to change. Brock looked through it with 2 fingers, pushing items aside like he was searching for something he was certain he'd find. Receipt for any of this? It's my personal property. I came in with it. None of it is store merchandise. That's convenient. He pulled the wallet open without asking, flipped through it, found nothing but a driver's license, 2 credit cards, and $40 in cash. He stared at the license for a long moment. Adelaide Winslow Carrigan. The name meant nothing to him. Why would it? She never used it the way some people use a name like a weapon.
Adelaide Carrigan.
He said it slowly, like he was testing whether it sounded like a lie. Never heard of you. You don't need to have heard of me to treat me decently. Something in his face shifted. Not shame, Adelaide noted. The same way she might note an item out of place on a shelf. Irritation. The particular irritation of a man who had never once had his authority questioned by someone who looked like her. A tired-looking older woman in a cardigan. Exactly the kind of customer he had decided, the moment he laid eyes on her, didn't belong in a store that had taken him 18 months to transform into something gleaming and impressive. I want you out of my store, Brock said. Now. I haven't done anything wrong. You're loitering. You're handling merchandise without purchasing. You're making my staff uncomfortable. Each accusation came faster than the last, stacking up like he needed there to be enough of them to justify what he was already deciding to do. Mason, the young associate from the perfume counter, had drifted closer, hovering near the edge of the conversation, his face uncertain. Mr. Halverson, I don't think she's done anything. I didn't ask you, Brock snapped, not even turning his head. Adelaide reached for her bag, gathering it closed. I'll leave. There's no need for any of this. Oh, you'll leave, Brock said. And something ugly crept into his voice now, something that had been there underneath the whole time, waiting. Let me help you find the door faster. He grabbed the tote bag off the counter before she could lift it herself. Sir, that's not necessary, he didn't answer. He turned and threw it. Not handed it back. Not set it down hard, threw it across 8 feet of marble floor, and it landed with that terrible flat crack that turned every head within 30 feet. The paperback skidded one direction. The tin of candies rolled the other. The reading glasses case popped open and bounced, and the photograph slid free of the unzipped pocket and landed face up on the cold stone. Theo's young, sunlit face staring up at the ceiling lights. The young mother with the stroller gasped audibly. The older couple by the scarves froze entirely. Adelaide did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She walked to where her things had scattered and knelt down, slowly her knees protesting the marble floor, and began gathering them one by one. She picked up the photograph first, wiped it gently against her sleeve, and tucked it carefully back into the notebook where it would be protected. She collected the candies, the glasses, the paperback, and placed each item back into the bag with steady, unhurried hands, while Brock Halverson stood over her, breathing hard, his face flushed with something that almost looked like satisfaction. Get up, he said, and get out. Mason crouched beside her, his voice barely a whisper. Ma'am, I am so sorry. This isn't, he's not usually. He stopped himself, unsure what he was even trying to say. Adelaide looked at him, and despite everything, something in her chest softened. It's not your fault, she said quietly. Thank you for trying. She stood, smoothed her cardigan, and walked toward the front entrance with her bag over her shoulder, her back straight, her chin level, every eye on the floor following her. She did not look back. She walked out into the parking lot, sat down in the driver's seat of her sedan, and for a long moment, She simply sat there, her hands resting on the steering wheel, not moving. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out the leather notebook, uncapped her pen, and began to write. Date, time, location, employee name, every word he had said, every customer who had witnessed it. 2 full pages, her handwriting steady, controlled. The same handwriting she'd used to sign the original lease on her very first shoe counter 36 years ago. She did not start the car right away. Inside the store, Brock Halverson straightened his cufflinks, exhaled, and turned to find Mason still standing near the customer service desk, staring at him. "What?" Brock said. "Nothing." Mason's voice came out strange tight. "Get back to your station." Mason didn't move for a moment. Something had been nagging at the back of his mind from the second that woman had walked in. A face he recognized, but couldn't place, the way you recognize a song before you remember its name. It hit him fully now, standing there, watching Brock walk away like nothing had happened at all. He had seen that face before. 6 weeks ago, at new manager training in the corporate office downtown, on a screen at the front of a conference room, in a recorded welcome message that played for every new hire across all 41 stores. A woman in a simple gray blazer, speaking without notes for nearly 20 minutes about the history of the company, about treating every single customer like they mattered, no matter how they were dressed, no matter what they looked like, because you never knew who was standing in front of you. And more importantly, she'd said it shouldn't matter who they were. It should only matter that they were a person. Her name had been on the screen the entire time. Adelaide Winslow Carrigan, founder and chairwoman. Mason's stomach dropped through the floor. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opened the company directory, typed her name, and there it was, the same photo from the training video, the same steady eyes, the same face he had just watched kneel on a marble floor to pick up a photograph someone had thrown like garbage. He didn't think. He ran. He caught up with Brock near the back offices, grabbed his arm, and pulled him into the small break room before he could ask what was happening. "What is wrong with you?" But Mason cut him off, his voice low and urgent. "That woman, the one you just threw out. I know who she is, some random customer that's Adelaide Carrigan." Mason's voice cracked on the name. "She's the founder. She's the chairwoman. I saw her in the training video, the one they play for every new hire. She built this company, Brock. She built every store you've ever worked in." Brock Halverson went very still. "That's not possible," he said, but his voice had already lost its certainty. "She was wearing a cardigan. She had some old tote bag from a thrift store. I know what I saw," Mason said. "I sat through that training myself. 18 months ago. I'd know that face, anywhere." Brock's hand came up slowly and pressed against his own forehead, like he was trying to hold something in that was threatening to come apart. He thought of the wallet he'd flipped through without asking, the license he'd held up and dismissed. "Never heard of you," he had said, to the woman who had signed his paycheck before he'd even applied for the job. He thought of the photograph hitting the floor. He thought of how she had knelt down without a single word of protest, and gathered her things, and walked out with her back straight, and how he had felt, in that moment, like he had won something. The color drained out of his face the way water drains from a sink, slow at first and then all at once, leaving behind something gray and hollow that didn't look like his face anymore. "I have to fix this," he said, mostly to himself. "I'll call her. I'll apologize. I'll Brock." Mason's voice was flat now, steady in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. "She had a notebook. I saw her writing in it before she even came inside. Like she was already taking notes on the floor before any of this happened. She's been doing this for years. Surprise visits. Everybody in corporate calls it the chairwoman's walkthrough." He paused. "You didn't just embarrass a customer. You just showed the founder of this company exactly who you are when you think nobody important is watching." Brock Halverson sat down heavily in one of the break room chairs, his perfectly knotted tie suddenly feeling like it was choking him, and put his face in his hands. Outside, in the parking lot, Adelaide had finally started her car. She did not drive home. She drove 11 minutes to a small coffee shop near the highway. the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and she sat in a corner booth with her notebook open, finishing her notes with the same steady hand. Then she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Renald Achibi, her head of human resources, a careful, soft-spoken man who had been with the company for 19 years and had handled every difficult personnel matter Marlowe and Finch had faced with quiet, unshakable integrity. "I need you to pull the full personnel file on Brock Halverson at Riverside Plaza," she said. "And I need you to look specifically for any prior complaints involving customer treatment. Not performance complaints. Customer treatment." "Adelaide, what happened?" She told him, briefly, without embellishment, the way she told the truth about everything. By the time she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'll have something for you by tomorrow morning," Reynolds said finally. "I have a feeling this isn't the first time his name has come up." He was right. The second call was to her assistant, asking her to clear the following morning's calendar entirely. That evening, Adelaide sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her, the leather notebook open in front of her, and read back through everything she had written. She thought about the young man, Mason, crouching beside her on that marble floor, his apology trembling and sincere. She thought about the older couple by the scarves who had gone so quiet, the young mother with the stroller, all the witnesses who had watched a man throw an old woman's belongings across the floor and said nothing. Because saying something is harder than it looks from the outside. She knew that better than anyone. And she thought about the scarf 30 years ago, and the manager's hand around her wrist, and how nobody had stepped in that day either, and how she had promised herself, walking out of that store as a humiliated 19-year-old, that if she ever had the power to make sure it didn't happen to someone else, she would use it. She had spent 36 years building that power. Today, for the first time in a long time, she had felt exactly how it had felt to have none of it. Reynald called her at 6:40 the next morning. His voice was tight. "Adelaide, you need to see this file before you do anything else today." What the file showed, laid out across Reynolds' conference table by 8 that morning, was not one incident. It was a pattern, 4 years deep, stretching across 2 different companies. At his previous employer, 2 separate written complaints had been filed against Brock Halverson for accusing elderly customers of shoplifting without cause, both quietly settled with store credit, and an internal note that read essentially, "Performance otherwise excellent. No further action required." At Marlowe and Finch in just 18 months, there had already been 3 informal complaints from staff, describing him as dismissive and suspicious toward customers who, in the words of one associate's written statement, didn't look like they belonged in a store this nice. None of the complaints had ever escalated into formal review, because his sales numbers were extraordinary, and extraordinary numbers have a way of making people look the other way. 3 complaints, Adelaide said quietly, reading through the pages. 3 opportunities for someone to say something, and every time the answer was his revenue. "I'm sorry," Reynald said. "I should have flagged this pattern sooner." "No." Adelaide closed the file gently. "This isn't about whose fault it is that it took this long. It's about what we do starting this morning." By 10 that morning, Mason Reyes had submitted a full written statement, 4 pages, describing everything he had witnessed, every word Brock had said both before and after he realized who Adelaide was. The older couple from the scarf display had been identified through store security footage, and reached out personally, the husband leaving a voicemail that said simply, "We saw the whole thing. We should have said something. We're sorry we didn't, and we're glad someone's finally listening." By noon, Brock Halverson sat across from Adelaide and Reynald in a small conference room at corporate headquarters, his tie straight, his hands folded tightly on the table in front of him, his face still carrying the gray, hollowed-out look it had taken on the day before and never fully lost. "Miss Cardigan," he started, his voice cracking on the first word. "I want to apologize. I had no idea who you were. If I had known, that's exactly the problem, Mr. Halverson." Adelaide's voice was calm, steady, without anger, the way she had spoken to him on the marble floor the day before. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat a customer with basic respect. The fact that you only feel sorry now, knowing what you know, tells me everything I need to know about what was actually happening before. Brock's mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing to say to that, because there was nothing to say. Your termination is effective immediately, Reynolds said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. Given the documented pattern at this company, and your previous employer, we'll also be notifying the Retail Industry Association's Conduct Registry, as required by our policy. Brock Halverson left the building that afternoon, carrying a small cardboard box of belongings from his office, his perfectly knotted tie still in place, his shoulders rounded in a way they hadn't been 24 hours earlier. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. There was nothing left in him to raise. Within the week, what happened at Riverside Plaza had made its way through every level of the company, the way these things do, whispered in break rooms, and forwarded in messages between co-workers who had never met, but suddenly had something painfully in common. 2 more associates from other locations came forward with their own stories about Brock from his time there. Similar patterns, similar excuses, similar silence from anyone with the authority to stop it. Adelaide didn't make it public. She didn't go to the press, didn't post anything, didn't turn it into a headline. That had never been who she was. But she did something else. Something that mattered more to her than any apology Brock Halverson could have offered. She called a company-wide meeting, broadcast to every Marlowe and Finch location across all 11 states, and she stood at a podium without notes, the way she always did, and she told them what had happened. All of it. Not as a confession of weakness, but as a lesson she wanted every single employee in every single store to understand. I have spent 36 years building something I am deeply proud of, she said, her voice carrying clearly through speakers in 41 stores at once. And 2 days ago, I stood in one of my own stores, in a cardigan and worn-out shoes, and I was treated like I didn't matter. I want to tell you what I learned from that, because it isn't really a story about me. It's a story about every single person who has ever walked into one of our stores and been quietly decided, before they said a single word, that they didn't belong. She talked about dignity not being something you extend based on how someone looks, what they're wearing, or whether they seem, at a glance, like they can afford what's on the shelf. She talked about silence, about how every witness in that store the day before had felt something was wrong and said nothing, and how silence, however understandable, always becomes its own kind of permission. She talked about character, real character, being the thing you reveal not in front of cameras or executives, but in the small, unwatched moments when you believe no consequences are coming. I built this company on one idea, she said near the end, that everyone who walks through our doors deserves the same respect. Whether they're buying a $1,000 coat or just browsing on a Tuesday afternoon with nowhere else to be. Yesterday I learned that idea isn't as deeply rooted in every corner of what we've built as I believed it was. So today we're fixing that. She announced a new company-wide training program, developed personally under her direction, focused entirely on dignity and respect in customer interactions, with a clear, simple, zero-tolerance standard. No employee, regardless of their sales numbers, regardless of how impressive their results looked on paper, would ever again be permitted to treat a customer the way she had been treated, without consequence. Mason Reyes was offered a promotion to assistant manager at Riverside Plaza within a month. A decision Adelaide approved personally after reading his statement and learning he had been the only person in that entire store who had tried in the moment to stand up for her. He told a coworker later that the hardest part wasn't the day everything happened. It was every quiet moment before it, every small comment from Brock he'd let slide because he was new and didn't think it was his place to say anything. I told myself it wasn't my fight, he said. I'm never going to tell myself that again. The older couple, the husband and wife who had stood by the scarf display and said nothing, became regular customers at Riverside Plaza, And the husband, a quiet, retired schoolteacher, wrote Adelaide a letter that she kept folded in her desk drawer for years afterward. In it, he said, he had thought often, since that day, about all the times in his life he had watched something wrong happen and convinced himself it wasn't his place to speak. He said, watching her kneel down and pick up her things without a single word of protest had stayed with him longer than almost anything else he'd witnessed in his 71 years. And that he hoped, the next time, he would find the courage to say something while it was still happening, not after. As for Brock Halverson, he never worked in retail management again. His name, flagged in the industry conduct registry, followed him through 2 failed job applications before he stopped trying. The last anyone at Marlowe and Finch heard, he was managing inventory logistics for a regional shipping company. No customers, no sales floor, no one left to impress. Adelaide Winslow Carrigan still walks the floor of her own stores 4 or 5 times a year, in plain slacks and her late sister's worn canvas tote bag. The one with the strap she never bothered replacing even after that day, because she keeps it on purpose, not as a reminder of what was done to her, but as a reminder of what she did about it afterward. She still carries the photograph of her son in the notebook's inside pocket, the corner still slightly creased from where it hit the marble floor. What would you have done, standing in that store, watching a man throw an old woman's bag across the floor? Would you have looked away like everyone else did? Or would you have been the one who said something while it was still happening? I think about that question more than I'd like to admit. Because here's the truth I keep coming back to. Respect was never supposed to be something we hand out based on how impressive someone looks standing in front of us. It's supposed to be something we give simply because another person is standing there at all. The moment you decide someone deserves less because of their age, their clothes, the bag they're carrying, that decision says nothing about them. It says everything about you. Silence is never neutral either. When you watch something wrong happen and you say nothing, you're not staying out of it. You're choosing a side, and it's rarely the side you'd want to admit to choosing. Every person who stood quietly in that store that day was, in their own small way, telling Brock Halverson it was fine to keep going. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this one. How you treat someone you believe has no power over you, someone you think you'll never see again, someone you assume can't affect your life in any way, that is who you actually are. Not the version of yourself you show people who matter to your career. The real one. The one nobody's grading. So I'll ask you the same question I keep asking myself. Have you ever watched something unfair happen and stayed quiet because it felt easier? Or have you been the one who spoke up, even when it cost you something to do it? Respect costs nothing to give, but disrespect, sooner or later, always sends a bill. And the only real question left is whether you'll be there to pay it. Or whether somehow, against all odds, you'll be the one who finally said enough.